Hi, Stephanie. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Lauren. Thanks for having me.
All right, so start by telling the listeners who you are and what you do.
All right. So, hi, listeners. I'm Stephanie Kramer. I am the CHRO, the head of HR for L'Oreal USA, which is the number one beauty company in the world. I also am the author of Carry Strong, an empowered approach to navigating pregnancy and work. And most importantly, I am the mom of two young sons. It's great to be
I'm
here.
I'm sure people just heard that and they're like, where did you find the time to write a book? Like, this is not like a subtle, like, just do it in your free time hobby. So, like, where did you get the idea to write not just a book, but a book specifically about navigating pregnancy at work?
Well, yeah, the first thing is it was super hard to do concurrent, but also that's kind of how I live. Like I enjoy actually with teaching also. When I was writing the book, the teaching communications course at FIT at the Fashion Institute in New York, and I just find that the overall energy kind of spills over. So when I was working on the book, I was also thinking a lot about my own relationship with work with my young kids. I was also thinking about how to communicate differently as a professor, and so all of it kind of came together in a very strange working habits of 11 o'clock at night to 2 o'clock in the morning. So I don't totally recommend the approach, but it was very live. You know, it's a very much my personal experience, but also what I was seeing with colleagues and friends and coworkers. And then, of course, through the data. So I did 4 studies that were, quant studies across the country, census validated information. So it wasn't just my experience, but what we actually see within the world and in the US specifically, and then also interviewed around 230 women or female identifying birthing people about their own experiences, and not just a physician about what they could give as medical advice, but the physicians that I spoke to about their own personal story and then what advice they had also in their profession. So that duality was really important in the book, and that's what I brought to it personally.
I love that you wrote a book about navigating pregnancy at work because I feel like the minute you get pregnant, it's kind of this big looming thing is, oh my God, work, is it going to change? Like it is just a huge fear. And everyone says, don't think about it. You'll worry about it later. Anyway, it's the thing that you think about like before, during, and after. Since you did all this incredible data, like what are some big key takeaways? Obviously, people need to read the book to get more of it, but like what were some surprising takeaways for you?
Well, the one big surprising takeaway that I had that kind of started the whole impetus for the book was I had observed that there was a surge in confidence actually that happened. So just like you were saying, it often feels like, and there's these headlines, pregnancy is a career killer, or it's something you've got to get through. And but ultimately, actually, when people reflect on their own experiences, they were talking about it in a way where there's a lot of pride or a lot learned, or you're really excited. It's also, this is a very positive moment for majority of people that are experiencing it. So for me, it was how can I take that insight and then did I see it in the data? And actually, 1 out of 2 women, and one of the studies was 400 people who worked full time while they were pregnant, actually said they had a change in their confidence, and of the majority it was actually a positive. Now there was people who also felt the negative of that. And so what I wanted to do with the book was what can we learn from those who had that gain in order to support those that are actually feeling this extra burden or this heaviness with something that is so incredibly propelling. So that was a really big one. But another few insights that might be interesting for listeners to hear is 1 out of 2 women, so same big numbers, said that trying to conceive, not yet being pregnant at work, had an impact on their career. So a lot of the times when I speak to people, especially perhaps non-birthing people, they're like thinking about the baby bump. But you and I know, like the baby bump is, they're pretty far down the road in terms of pregnancy and work. You could be thinking about it or trying to be pregnant at work for 5 years and not yet have a baby. And that's a really big deal. It's a big deal for the individual because she's obviously been thinking about this for a long time and it's having an impact on how she navigates her career, publicly or privately. But it's also a big deal for your teams and for me as the head of HR. When I talk to other leaders, especially in the HR practice, I try to say, like, think about that. That's not just having this tiny effect on your population where right now you can see their baby bump. You're thinking about a huge amount. It's like 89% of the workforce of millennials by 2026 will be parents. That's a
Yeah.
pretty big amount of your population that could be at any point thinking about it, trying, or actively pregnant.
I mean, it's a really good point, and you're right. People focus so much on the baby bump. By by then, who
Which is
knows what?
important,
Or
super
yeah, it is.
important.
But people just assume it like just happens, and then one day you show up with a baby bump, and there's so much more that goes
Exactly.
into it. Um,
Totally.
so I want to in your book, I understand that you have both principles and, phases. Can you start with the principles? What are they and how can we apply them when we're thinking about pregnancy and work?
Sure. So the first one is actually what we're talking about, which is perspective. So the idea, does pregnancy, does it have to have that negative headline? Is it really something to just get through? But the perspective is also really important because we still have the motherhood penalty, the fatherhood bonus. But in
Yeah.
fact, it's actually not true because mothers are actually providing 47% of the breadwinners are mothers. So it's this misconception. So within the first chapter of perspective, I teach you kind of about the overall perspective on pregnancy and work and why we feel that way. So the unburdening, but also how you find your own perspective. So the will this matter? Like, yes, if it matters to you, it matters. But is this I'm going to worry about this for 5 minutes, for 5 hours, 5 days, 5 months, 5 weeks, 5 years, et cetera? And how do you build that perspective for yourself? The second one is balance, because we can't have a conversation about working parents without someone asking probably you or I about work-life balance, which I give a reframe when I talk a bit more about a fluid approach, because balance is uncomfortable, something that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to strive for balance. But instead, we think about it fluid. Right now, I'm here with you. I am definitely, my kid just got home from the bus. I had to put a note on the door, podcast in progress. And, that's balance too. That's being where your feet are and sliding a bit more. Where sometimes when you have a new job or you're doing something big with work, for even a couple of days, a couple hours, of course, but even a couple of weeks, you might have a different balance than you ultimately are striving for in a 50-50. So balance is a really big one. Then I talk about community and communication. So two things you both need to get better at as skills. Ultimately, pregnancy and work or any really major life moment pushes you in both of those. Like, how do I want to communicate? Might be very different on the same topic. I often give the example of infertility or going through fertility treatment. One person might want to say to their boss or teammate or HR, I'm going through fertility treatments. That means that every day for the next several days, I'm going to have morning monitoring at 8 a.m. and I won't be available. And another person, same topic, same need, might say, hey, I'm going through something personal. I don't need anything else from you right now, but I want you to know that I've got something going on. And that's really important. That's the same experience in a different lens that you need to think about with communication. Ultimately, you come out actually even a better relationship with those around you when you navigate these really important moments to you. Community is huge. So for me, this is a moment where, I mean, so many of us, I know also from your other listeners and many of the podcasts that I've listened to, which I think are fantastic, Lauren, it's creating a sense of community. It's how do we establish what we need for this moment, but also ongoing. And it's something that you're part of. And then last but not least, the hardest principle to write for sure was identity, which it changes quite a lot in these major life moments, including with pregnancy and work. And so for me, that chapter was really important, includes a lot of people's stories about transformation or self-trust and how do you navigate with your purpose also, especially when you're thinking about something as big as having a baby.
I know I can only speak from my own personal experience, but the identity piece has been so big for me. I didn't quite realize how transformational it was going to be. And of course, it doesn't happen on the first day. It happens
Right.
over time. Like I'm 3 years in with two kids, and I feel like, I don't know, maybe it kicked in about 12 months ago. Like I started to feel, I was like, okay, things are different, and like kind of
Yeah.
recognizing like my identity is changing. I am changing. What I want is changing. Um, and it's just interesting. It's definitely a process. I don't know that I was able to articulate that was happening. I only can say that in hindsight. And at times I was getting worried. I was like, I definitely have, and I've talked about it on the show, like I'm losing my ambition. I'm losing my go-getterness. I was just at a kid's birthday party last week and someone said that to me. They're like, I want to slow down. Like I want to downshift the gears in my career. And she's like, I've never felt that way. Like what is happening? So I think the identity thing is really big. And maybe some people they shift the gears up and they're like, I'm ready to do more in my career.
Totally.
Again, I'm only speaking from my own experience, but that's a really tough one. I feel like anytime your identity feels like it's being, I don't know, like rewritten for you, like what you identify with. It's I don't know, it's uncomfortable.
It really is, and it's uncomfortable to even talk about it. And I
Yeah.
think, you're both afraid of, sometimes people would say like, and I don't know who I am, or you also want people to think of you as the same and not
Yeah.
different. So you're stuck in between this, like, but I'm the same person, but also I'm different.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
changes a lot with your kids. I think you also go from this responsibility when you're pregnant and you physically look different, but maybe you're really not that different, or you don't feel different in the moment, to then you have your responsibility of taking care of a small child, which is very different than now. My kids are 6 and 9, which is a different type of identity shift too, of being their mom and also having that conversation with them, where I'm super proud. I mean, you even say it. And it's interesting, and what we choose to share and how we share it. I also was somebody who was much more private about my personal life until after I had kids, and now I think it's also to try to encourage others to feel comfortable with all dimensions of themselves. But I try to like really parent out loud, just like I work out loud at home, where I come home and I talk about my job with my kids. Just
Yeah.
instead of saying like I missed you and I was away and it was so hard, I'm like, I'm really proud of what I did today, because I want them to be the same way too, and I want that to
Yeah.
be a different dimension of them. But it's always changing too. As much as you are who you are, it does change over time how you want that to be lived.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in a way, it's good that things change, but also change is scary.
It is
um,
super scary.
okay, I want to get to some probably like obvious questions that listeners might have. So, with regards to communication, how and when should you tell your boss you're pregnant? This is always the big one. And I also want to bring this up because I think we've all seen these like horror stories of people who find out they're pregnant, share it with their boss, and then there's a layoff or something else. And so
Right.
you get have this natural insecurity that I'm going to share this information and it's going to be used against me for a layoff or projects or this, that. So maybe you can address kind of both of those, like in general, plus what if you have that kind of fear?
For sure. So I think one of the things I often tell people too, with the more in general answer, and then also you do not need to disclose your pregnancy, but there are reasons why you may want to. So what I often tell people is to start with like the who, what, when, where, why questions that we all know, and we're learning our third grade research project, since I just experienced a third grade research project.
You're redoing
Who
third grade.
exactly. Well, my older son is. So who do you need to tell? Do you need to, so how to tell my boss I'm pregnant is the number one Googled question with regards to pregnancy and work. So, but who? Is it your boss? Is it HR? Is it a friend? Is it another teammate or a colleague? Because the who actually drives what you need. So who do you need to tell? Let's say it's your boss. All right. What do you need to tell them? Now, just like the example I used with going through fertility, it might be maybe you actually are struggling with HG, or you have really bad morning sickness, or you're struggling in a way where you actually need to disclose something to the right person in order to help you both navigate your health and how to advocate for yourself, but also to navigate your work and your responsibilities. So that can also have an impact. Or if you're at a place of work where actually the environment could have an impact on your health, you're also going to need to do that. Now, you want to be really thoughtful about the way you feel most comfortable for yourself and also your responsibility of your team. That's ultimately about you advocating for your health of your baby as well. So who do you need to tell? Where and when? There's that where that a lot of us now, we have so many virtual meetings. Maybe you have a standing status or a regular meeting with your boss, if we're using that example, where that might be more comfortable for you. Or you're going through that severe HG, or you have something you really need to tell. Don't wait. Make sure that that's a moment where you're ready and comfortable, but also that you're advocating for yourself and your baby in that moment. And I think those are two really important questions, like who do you need to tell and when you need to tell them. The how and the why kind of go together, because again, it's about what you need in that moment. Often I say that to people, like, why are you telling them in the first place? And you hope that you're met with, there's two amazing examples in the book. One, the boss said to the individual, if you are half as good of a parent as you are an employee, that's one lucky kid. Can be a really awesome moment. You could be really afraid of sharing that news, but ultimately, this could be a moment also where you're like, that's right. I'm proud to work here and I'm supported. And in fact, now I can get resources and I have this boss who's also going to help me to navigate the transition of my work, or just to know and just be celebrating this moment with me. And then on the other side, it's when those moments don't happen, when you don't feel that support. I feel like it also puts the red flag up on both the place of work and what you may need from other sources as well.
So let's say you do experience a bad reaction, like they don't seem overly supportive. Their facial expression definitely shows that they're a little annoyed or whatever, anything negative. Most people might put up a red flag, but it's not like you want to go start a job search. That's not
Right.
exactly high on your list when you're pregnant. You like want as much stability as possible. So what about when that happens? What should you do? Just like keep it in your back pocket and job search later, or what?
It's really interesting. I often get asked about interviewing when pregnant, like, should I be going to look for a new job? And there's some stories in the book, by the way, with tons of success of doing that. But it's the stability that other people seek when you have this moment of instability in your life. But you're going to need to do these check-ins, not just when you're at that point of how to tell my boss I'm pregnant, but you're going to do it before. You're going to do it when you're in the trying to conceive, or maybe you become suddenly pregnant and then you're kind of pushed into the revealing state a little sooner. But you're going to do it earlier. You're going to check in with, like, all right, am I feeling green? Am I feeling good about what I'm doing, about my work, about my project, about my team, about my boss? Am I challenged, but not too challenged, but enough challenged? Like you're just saying with our identity. Or am I yellow? Am I feeling some hesitation coming from somewhere? Is it coming from my work? Is it coming from my boss or my team? Is it not enough of a challenge, but there's something sticky, when you're like driving and like, do you push the gas or you push on the brakes? And that yellow can help you even in the trying to conceive phase, or you red, and that's that red flag. And that often can be, I need to think about a different part of my job, a dimension, or something in my life that kind of helps to offset. Or frankly, sometimes it's things in your life that are giving you the red flags, where actually work can help to provide the stability. But that red flag is something you have to pay attention to. So the best advice I can give is use that traffic light, not just in that one moment, but try to think about it, before, during, and also, in fact, when you return. So best case scenario, you have your maternity leave, you come back, and you're checking in again with yourself about how you feel, because you're going to change, like that identity shift. The work may change, the team may change. So you want to make sure, how am I feeling? Am I green? Am I in that zone? What would it take to get to that zone? And especially, a lot of women are often concerned about what they're going to lose. So I was in this great place, and then I went maternity leave and something happened. I was about to be promoted. So how do you find that again? And then same with those yellow checkpoints or the red part. So one thing that I talk about in the book that I just kind of mentioned was that I do it in phases. So I have a BTTC, so preconception, interviewed college age students, trying to conceive, which is super important, and it's a very long phase for so many of us. And again, you could be pregnant at work for a long time and not yet have a baby, so there's that impact. And then there's the secret time. So I like to say that is one of the hardest parts about work and pregnancy that I really wish I would have had some advice on. And I definitely learned a lot from the book, from the women's stories. But there's this private time, I call it the hush, which is when you decide to disclose your pregnancy. For some people, it might be like 2 days. I had friends that, immediately were like, oh, I told work today. I'm like, didn't you just find out? And other
Yeah.
people like me, which I waited way too long. Maybe I should have disclosed sooner than, my 28, 29 weeks. Or a lot of people during the pandemic that were like, doing their video
Yeah,
from
that
here.
was me.
And yeah, and it was like, I'm going to have a baby next week.
Yeah.
But it can help with, at least that's kind of the pre-pregnancy part we don't often talk about.
Yeah, definitely. So if you had to give it like a timeline, like an ideal time might be like month 4, month 3.
Yeah.
What do you
So
like? I
a
know it's
lot of
different for
people,
everybody, but
so that push, the push pregnancy, so preconception, BPTC, trying to conceive, the hush, the private pregnancy, then delineated by how to tell somebody I'm pregnant. And then you go into the push, like public pregnancy, and then you move into anticipating the great return, or thinking about coming back to work, but or not, which is also fine. The private time is really differentiated by how you feel, by your place of work, and it can be based off of physical disclosure. A lot of people wait until that 12-week appointment, especially when they're concerned about loss or where they want to feel comfortable. But for other people, it might be much sooner if you need that, or to the right people, or it might be much later. And so that, I think that guideline kind of helps a little bit, instead of that, oh, it's the end of the first trimester, I need to tell work. You actually don't. So you can
yeah.
choose that private time. I often like to say to people, if, especially, let's take the extreme example of you're interviewing for a new job, and do I tell them or not?
Yeah.
Like, you're creating a new relationship. So you don't have to, but you're creating a new relationship with someone where you want to work and you want to be supported. And that's a decision that you're going to make. So if you're telling your friends, if you're telling people and you're walking through the grocery store and you would be willing to tell them you're pregnant, then probably a good idea to share your news. But on the other hand, it's not something that should have an impact on a decision.
I know. And I think people hear that and they know that. And yet, especially in a tight job market like what we're in, it's like,
Yeah,
you don't want any negatives against you. And you're like,
right.
of course, people shouldn't see pregnancy as a negative, but if I'm being realistic, am I going to get the job if I'm 7 months pregnant versus some guy who isn't going to go out on a 4 month maternity leave in a few months? And I mean, what's your response to that? I mean, I know
Yeah.
the legal response, but like, how do you
So,
navigate that?
I think it's a great question. There's a couple things that you just said that I think are good examples. One, we want to encourage all genders to take their leaves because that's an important part of changing the script on how I think we embrace it as part of our overall very long careers. It's only a very small portion of our
Yeah,
career
that's
overall.
true.
But also, if you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to hire, employee number one, and you have the biggest event ever happening in 2 months, then it might also be something where it's not necessarily picking because you're pregnant or not, but based off of what the need is right now. And I think that's something that it's a tricky one because it's a balance between choosing the person without kind of those circumstances, but also choosing what you need for your future organization or company right now. Now, one thing I did have a great example of someone that I was speaking to about this, and they were in that situation and they were 7 months pregnant and they were about to have an offer from a very small company that was looking for employee, I think 4 or something like that. And she ended up having the conversation and telling them that she was pregnant. But they had a conversation together and they said, okay, well, listen, if you start for 2 months, you set up this temp that we're going to have, you can come back in. And then if we have the ability to hire the temp under you, we can do that going forward. And I was like, that's it. That's the conversation that you ultimately want to have. But it will depend on the place of work, the type of job, et cetera. But of course, it's not because of the pregnancy. It's actually ultimately also because of the work and the place of work.
But so you recommend, I mean, I do this too, kind of where I basically tell people, I'm like, look, this is a new relationship you have with the person. If you wait until you accept the job offer and then tell them you're pregnant, it feels like almost a little deceitful or like you were lying,
Right.
even though you weren't
Right.
asked directly, which they're not allowed to ask. And so I always look at it like, yes, you should share that information. Legally, you don't have to though, right?
Correct. And the other side of that too is I've also had conversations with people where, or me personally, you're going through multiple losses and you don't necessarily, you may be telling only those closest to you. And it might not feel right for you to do that. And maybe you're actually advocating for a new role or to make a new move because you're trying to create some stability also for your future family. And
Yeah.
maybe you're not ready to share that. That's okay too. I think that you just kind of have to recognize where that threshold is and what's realistic for both your comfort and also for the relationship you're creating. But ultimately, in that particular instance of the other story I had in mind, the person was pregnant, they joined a new company, and it was okay. It works out. It's again, it's about the length of time to you and the value. It's like when we ask people, okay, can you start right away tomorrow? I always say to people, I'm like, say you start in a couple of weeks. Like those 2 weeks or that time will matter so much more to you to offboard where you were, to get yourself organized, take a breather, and to start fresh and start in your new organization or your new team, et cetera, with kind of this renewed energy than us, on the other side of someone hiring going, oh, and they joined 36 minutes after they left their old job. Like
Yeah.
give yourself that grace that ultimately this is also your, journey. And it will fit into other places of work. And it's a very tight market, but there's a lot of great opportunities there too.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like everyone would love to do that. You get so afraid in a tight market of
For
basically
sure.
asking for anything because you're like,
Yeah.
you get so superstitious. Okay, I want to wrap up by talking about the shift in identity. And you go from working woman to working mother. I mean, what are some things to consider, and how do you navigate the shift to working motherhood? And I gotta say, it's like the headlines and the news about being a working parent, but especially working moms, is scary. And
Mhm.
I am a working mom, and I have to tell you, it does feel lonely out there. Like nobody's coming to help us, and it's all falling on us. And I don't want to get totally down on this, but like, how do you navigate that shift, and especially at work?
So, first of all, it's true. I think that we continue to feel that, and in the book, I highlight a lot of solutions that often a lot of mom entrepreneurs are also bringing to the table for us to continue to support each other. And that's the spirit of community and what we continue to do. But also, there has been a significant evolution. Number one, I think post COVID, there was a huge concern about the rebound of working mothers within the workplace. We're actually now at the highest ever labor participation rate for women with children under 5. because one, the economy needs us. I always like to put that on the table.
Yeah.
Like we certainly need working moms. We need parents, working parents of all gender, which is very important. But it's also because we have fractional labor, we have more hybrid work, we have different ways that we're evolving how we work overall. And it's important that all of us are advocating not just for what we need, but what our teammates need. And I say that as an important bridge to, often I'm talking about working women in pregnancy, but all of these major life intersections, or as you were saying, asking for what you need, when you're interviewing or when you're considering a place of work, don't just ask if they have a mother's room, ask where it is. It's the story that's in the book, which I think is fantastic. Or if you're not sure you're ever going to need some resources, but you've heard about them at companies, do your homework and ask on behalf of what my colleagues have access to. So you don't have to put all that burden on you or be afraid of being judged, but there is a way to learn a lot about places of work you may consider and the balance of what you're looking for and what you can have offered that you're going to try to do as a matching without taking that as a risk for something you're looking for. It's a really important mindset shift, I think, for
Yeah.
you. The other part, is that boundaries, constantly assessing your boundaries and your flexibility. And it's easier said than done. And I know you and I have talked about this before, but it's choices that you're making. For me, it's like, okay, I'm still going to do these trips, but on the other side of it, I'm going to really look and make sure I'm prioritizing this week or next week, especially with the end of the school year, which I know we just went through. How do we prioritize those other pieces? And I really think that there's been a shift in company cultures there as well, where it's no longer as set, but there's flexibility that goes on both ways. Goes for places of work where you may be responding to things in a different way than you were before with outside rigid guidelines. But on the other hand, I also feel much freer with having the ability to advocate for flexibility. And we need to encourage all genders to do it because then it's, tide rises all ships.
Yeah, I know for me, when I embarked on a job search recently, I specifically wanted a remote or hybrid work environment.
Right.
One of the first things I did when I got there is I set time on my calendar for like kid drop off, kid pickup.
Yeah.
By the way, my boss and my colleagues did that also. So it was really encouraging for me to be like, wow, people are really parenting out loud here. So that was important to me for the culture and absolutely easier to set boundaries when other people are doing it too. And then wasn't like a must have, but it was definitely like high on my list is I really wanted to work for another working parent. So my boss is a working parent and I really love that because I will say it is really hard to get it until you have kids and you're in it. And so I don't know, those are like three tangible things I can offer to people. What I was, and look, you can always make your dream list and then you have to decide what are your must haves, your nice to haves, and like deal breakers.
Yeah.
So for me, the deal breaker would have been probably the schedule, but I'm just saying those were certainly really important things. All right, Stephanie, as we wrap up, I want to know just like what's one thing, like your one call to action for those listening who are maybe pregnant right now or thinking of, planning pregnancy. I know you had phases in the book that you talked about, and there was a lot of like before your pregnant phases. So anyway, what's one
Yeah.
call to action for maybe those listening who might be in one of those phases?
Well, I think one thing that's really important is that even if you have colleagues around you that have had similar experiences, just because it happened to other people doesn't mean that it's not different for you. So it's something where I often talk about our shared experiences and how we can lift each other up as a community, which is really important. But also, maybe it's the first time you're experiencing a loss, or maybe it's the first time that you're taking your breast pump to work. And that doesn't mean that it should be easier. In fact, it's still going to be a big thing. It's a big deal. So if it's a big deal for you, then it's a big deal. And don't put your pressure on yourself. I think that's something that I certainly felt a big responsibility with the book was ultimately, yes, this can help a big group of us. All of us are trying to improve for working parents. We know we're an asset in the workplace. We absolutely are. And also ultimately for the future of work too, because so many people who come after us, we want to lift them up. We don't want to have them have to get through what maybe we had to get through, but you're still an individual. And the very first page of the book says, you can do it all, not at the same time and not alone. And just remember that you can do it all is your all. It's not defined by somebody else, but it also is permission. Like you don't have to, you can choose how you want that all to be yours. Just because my all was a little bit crazy, as we discussed in the beginning, doesn't mean that has to be what you should do. The not at the same time is really important. I really love what you just said about delineating your must have, and it's in the moment. It's going to be in different phases
Yeah.
when you're pregnant, when you have a newborn, and then, you know, when you have older children. So you have to constantly reassess it, but not with pressure, more just to kind of rejigger those priorities and still maintain what the clear ones are. And the last and most important part is, you know, not alone, because that community of support is key, but reach out, you know, use resources, connect with other parents, and make sure that you're not feeling alone. Even if your individual experience is incredibly powerful, there's a lot of people that want to support you along the way. And I really believe that our hindsight can be someone else's foresight. So that's why I'm so eager to share it, and so grateful for so many stories that, you know, will help to make people feel less alone too.
I love it. I wish I had read this book like 4 years ago. But thank God you wrote it. It's called Carry Strong. I'll put it in the show notes. Where else can people find you, follow you, keep up with your work?
Yes. So you can follow Carry Strong Pregnancy on Instagram. You can see me on LinkedIn, Stephanie Kramer, and you can find any of the resources, including how to tell my boss I'm pregnant, on the Carry Strong website. So let me know how I can help. And thank you again, Lauren, for everything you've created. And such a big fan. Thank you.
Thank you.